So in part one, we explained to you amortization and why that has such a major impact on Nottingham Forest. In part two, we will talk to you about how much we believe Forest are going to breach by and how there is a way to save Morgan Gibbs-White, Murillo and Callum Hudson-Odoi from being sold. Welcome to FFTV. Good morning, good evening, or good night. I hope you guys are doing well, and welcome to part two on PSR and Nottingham Forest trouble that they find themselves in. Coming up on this episode, we'll give you a quick refresher on Forest's current situation in terms of their allowances. We'll talk to you about the players' values based on the amortization maths that we have done on all the Forest squad. And we'll talk to you about how badly Forest are behind the line, what we've gathered here at FFTV. And then finally, is there a solution that can allow Forest to keep Callum Hudson-Odoi, Murillo and Morgan Gibbs-White at the club? Yes, there is. We'll come on to that as well. If you're enjoying the content, please don't forget to hit that like button. Let's see if we can get 606 likes on this video. And please subscribe to the channel if you're new. It's completely free to do. Just click on that button down there. Press it now if it says to you subscribe. And of course, don't forget, you've not got long to grab this signed framed LED Forest kit from last season, signed by the squad. The link's pinned in the comments from Football Prizes. Let's get on with this. And what I want to do, I want to start with a quick refresh. I'm hoping most of you know this already in terms of Forest allowances. And by the way, if you haven't watched part one of this video, I'll leave a link up there for you. Make sure you watch that first because it will give you the background on amortization and exactly what that means and how it's impacting Nottingham Forest. But Forest's current PSR situation, in terms of the current limits we have, now in a Premier League club, over a rolling 3-year period, the clubs can make the loss of no more than 105 million. And that breaks down to basically 35 million per season. Now, with Forest only having 2 years in the Premier League and 1 year in the Championship, the maximum loss we can make is the 2 Premier League 35 mils and the 1 Championship one that we carried over, and that's 13 mil, which gives us a grand total of 83 million in that 3-year period. Now, the interesting fact is, and I'm sure you guys already know this, is that come July the 1st, Forest basically become a fully fledged Premier League team in accordance with PSR and can lose 105 million. So the problem now is, what can Forest do with that 83? And in terms of the maths that we've done to look through all of this, one, we know for a fact that Forest believe they were going to breach by 15 million. That's what they declared in January. But since then, there has been more spend. Things like wages have increased. Yes, Forest have taken some players now off the books, but that will impact next year's PSR. At the moment, the number we believe it to be is somewhere between 24 and 26 million that Forest will breach by. It is an extremely hard figure to figure out. And I'm not saying it with dead certainty. I wouldn't put my mortgage on it because, as I just mentioned, the factors of wages, bonuses, other little things that go into PSR, we can't say without having the books in front of us. Now, we have spoken to financial experts as well, the likes of good friend of the channel, Kieran Maguire, and a few others as well, who all seem to be in agreement that they believe the way Forest are going now, they are going to breach. And we are going to be in big trouble. So I would say take our number as the middle ground. You could say it could be as low as 15 if Forest kept everything in order in accordance to their expectations, or I think it could maybe reach 30. But 25 is roughly where we believe it is. Now, it's not all doom and gloom, because Forest do have some valuable assets that they can use and that they can sell. We've talked about Morgan Gibbs-White, we've talked about Murillo, and we've talked about Callum Hudson-Odoi. What I want to do now is just take you through Forest values in the squad based on PSR. Remember, just because we spent allegedly 35 to 40 million on Morgan Gibbs-White, it doesn't mean we need to sell him for more than that to make PSR profit. So these players that I'm about to bring up, barring Mangala, are actually the most profitable that Forest have. And the rest of the squad, it's give or take $1 million here either side. So let's jump into that now. So let's look at some of the key players that Forest have that they can make profit for. And in total, there are only 7 Forest players that would make a significant dent in terms of the PSR profitability. And the one who comes in bottom of those 7, if you like, is actually our captain himself, Joe Worrell. Joe Worrell, because he was through the academy, goes down as 0. Basically, they don't put him even on the sheet when it comes to PSR. So anything we sell him for would create 100% or thereabouts profit. His valuation currently is 4 million, and that includes some interest from some championship clubs as well. And coming in second place would be our other academy player, which is Ryan Yates. Ryan Yates, again, amortization worth 0. And in terms of transfer value, he's now on the market, or his valuation, should I say, on the market is at £10 million. And that would be £10 million profit if we sold him for that. In third place is Taiwo, who Forest bought for 17.5 million. And his amortization value right now is 10 million. So if Forest were to sell Taiwo for anything over 10 million, this would be classed as profit. With his value being in and around 25 million, this would create £15 million worth of profit. Remember to check episode 1 if you haven't, if you're a little confused as to why it's not 7.5 million, for example. Now, in terms of our fourth least most valueless player, and I guess we can talk about the top 3 now, would be Callum Hudson-Odoi. Callum Hudson-Odoi was bought for 3 million plus add-ons from Chelsea, bringing it up to about 5 million, with his transfer value now somewhere between 25 and 35 million. He would bring in a whopping 25 million profit, but 27 million profit, but he has a sell-on clause from Chelsea, which is believed to be about 20 or 25%. But even with that, Forest would stand to make a huge profit on him. And then in second place would be Morgan Gibbs-White. Morgan Gibbs-White, who Forest paid about 25 million up front for, and have probably paid in around 32 to 35 million for. He would be break even on PSR at 21 million. With his market valuation coming in at about 60 million, Forest would be looking at making 39 million profit on Morgan Gibbs-White. And our most valuable player is, of course, Murillo, being brought in from Brazil for a really, really small fee of 11 million. With a transfer value now of between 50 and 60 million, Forest are set to make in and around £50 million on him. So some interesting numbers there. Did you guys have that down as your list? Those are the most valuable players that Forest have. And again, just to reiterate, I'm talking in terms of PSR numbers, not in terms of bought for X and sold for Y. But let me know who you thought Forest's most valuable player was. Okay, so we did miss one player off that list, as I mentioned previously, and that, of course, is Mangala, because his situation is slightly different with his loan out to Lyon. But nonetheless, let's now put him in because he is worth decent money to Forest. Let's bring him in and have a look. So Oral Mangala was purchased for £11 million on a 4-year contract at Nottingham Forest, and he has, in terms of his amortization, that leaves him with the equation of 11 million divided by 4, and that gives him an annual amortization of 2.75 million per year. Now, he has 2 years left on his contract, and if you times that by the annual amortization, you get 5.5. So anything that we sell Mangala for over 5.5 million would actually be pure profit for Forest in relation to PSR. So if we sold him for 6.5 million, then Forest have made 1 million, despite the fact we purchased him for 11 million, if you're still following. Now, why is this different? Because we have already received 8 million for him from Lyon as a loan fee. And that basically wipes out his amortization that Forest have left, and in fact puts Forest into a couple of million on profit against a Mangala. Now, that's good in itself. And there is an option to buy, which we believe Lyon are going to take up for Oral Mangala for £15 million. Some are reporting 20, but again, Forest reported it as 15 million. The big problem with this one is that most options to buy deals go through on the 1st of July onwards. And that, of course, will be after the PSR cutoff date. So this causes a huge dilemma to Nottingham Forest, because if he goes on next year's books, not this year's books. The 8 million loan fee, however, will go on this year's books and will count as about 2 to 3 million in terms of PSR profit. So if we take that into account, Forest still need to find at least 20 to 30 million to make sure they are safe from the PSR line. And what we're going to do now is we're going to break this down into potential routes that Forest could take in terms of which players they can sell or need to sell to get themselves over that dotted line. Okay, so there are many different combos that Forest can go with. And remember, they have only until the 30th of June to get this over the line. And there are a couple kind of golden bullets, if you like, one shot, one kill. And the main one being Murillo. Remember, this is all based on us getting market value for these players. So with Murillo's amortization being worth 11 million and his market value being 60 million, if Forest were to get that, that would be 49 million pounds profit. And Forest would be long, home and dry with the sale of Murillo. In fact, even if we didn't get market value on Murillo and got him sold, say, to Liverpool, where he's linked, for about 50 million, Forest would still make 39 million pounds profit, which is again way past our calculations in terms of what Forest need. With Morgan Gibbs-White, he could also be a golden bullet in himself alone, but it will depend on the transfer value. We believe that Forest value him from 60 to 70 million. And with his amortization being 21 million, his profit could be in and around 40 to 50 million pounds. However, as this deadline looms closer, we are now hearing rumours and stories about Forest are willing to deal at 40 million pounds. That would create a PSR profit of Morgan Gibbs-White at about 20 million for Forest. Now that in itself would not be enough. And if it's where we believe it to be, in and around the 25 million pounds, then Joe Worrell must and probably will go as well for about 4 million. So it is imperative that if Morgan Gibbs-White goes, that he has to go for at least, in our calculations, 50 million pounds. That would see Forest home and safe. Now, in terms of Callum Hudson-Odoi, he too could nearly fix the issue by himself. If Forest were to get 30 to 35 million for him, let's call it 30, let's say we've paid the add-ons, you are still looking at about 25 million pounds PSR profit plus the 4 million for Joe Worrell, because I'm almost sure he will be leaving. And that gets you to about 29 million and pretty much safe. For me personally, when I look at this and I look at the maths, I look at Yates as being one of the most important assets Forest currently have in terms of PSR, because he will generate 10 million by himself if, again, he was sold at market value. So you are looking at potentially, if you wanted to keep Callum Hudson-Odoi, Murillo and Morgan Gibbs-White, you could do this by selling the other three, because you would get 4 million for Worrell, you'd get 10 for Yates, bringing you up to 14. And if we sold Taiwo, that would be another 15 million, which brings us, what, 1 or 2 million shy of 30 million. Honestly speaking, that would be my preferred option. However, to do 3 deals in less than a month, with the transfer window officially opening on the 14th of June, so technically speaking, there's 2 to 3 weeks to get the deals done, even though we all know that they're talking from now, I think is too tight. And this is why I believe Forest are seriously contemplating selling either Murillo or Morgan Gibbs-White. Now, if Forest were to sell Murillo and then they went and sold one of the other 2 assets in Callum Hudson-Odoi or Morgan Gibbs-White, then the club are making a huge mistake, because they don't need to do this, because we would be home and safe and moving up to 105 in terms of PSR. And honestly, when you look at these numbers, it is probably safer to sell Murillo. Even though if a gun was to my head, I'd rather keep him than Morgan Gibbs-White. I'd rather keep them all. But it just puts us home and dry if we could get at least £50 million for him. But Forest have to reduce this deficit before the 30th of June. Now, what do I think is going to happen? And I think there is good enough evidence to suggest that Forest may purposely breach FFP. Why do I say this? Because when you read through the reports in terms of Forest's case, looking back over the first points deduction when we got hit with 4, when you look at what the panelists were saying, they were saying there was no evidence of Forest trying to sell Brennan Johnson before the PSR cutoff date, and therefore they couldn't class it as a near miss. They said that Forest should have been almost, looking for suitors from about January in the previous window to at least show there was an intent to sell him. And why do I think this is important? Because we know that Mangala has already had a deal agreed for 15 million. And if Forest were to say sell Joe Worrell and maybe 1 or 2 other players, and then sell Mangala for an extra, it would basically be 18 million on PSR. That might be enough for them to get over the line, but breach it by 1 day. And they would have precedent to argue that 1 day is 100% a near miss. And Mangala in himself, with Joe Worrell, etc., could save us from needing to sell the other 3 players. There are a lot of moving parts in this. And it really is going to probably come down to a question being asked to Nuno of who he wants to lose least out of the 3 gems that we have. Now, a lot of you have been asking in the comments saying, well, what about the Johnson money itself, the 47.5 million? That did go into this year's PSR. That was included on the maths and the numbers. However, don't forget that because of that Johnson money, Forest were then able to purchase the likes of Sangare. We then got Origi on his money. We got Omar Bamadeli. All these last minute deals that went through and over the line were because of the Johnson sale. So that's been accounted for into this year. And Forest is still declaring, as of January, February time, they were still £15 million adrift. So we are in big trouble. We do have time to rectify this. And these are the scenarios that can save Forest. I need to ask you guys, what is your combo? From that list that I've showed you, ignore Mangala for now. How would you make up that? Let's call it 30 million. Let's make it the worst case scenario on this. How would you make up that £30 million deficit for PSR? Let me know in the comments down below. I hope you've enjoyed this 2-parter. As the numbers get clearer, and we'll probably get Kieran Maguire and a couple of others on as well to discuss this further as we get closer to the 30th of June deadline, we will keep you informed and updated on these figures. But hopefully you now have a broader understanding of how these numbers work, why buying Morgan Gibbs-White for £35 million and selling him for £45 million doesn't mean we've made £10 million profit on him, and things like that. If you've enjoyed this video, please don't forget, if you haven't already, hit that like button. Subscribe to Forest Fan TV if you are new. Go grab your tickets for the signed framed LED shirt. I'll leave the link on the end screen for you. We'll see you on the next video. Come on, you Reds.